So now we want to add a new segment here in terms of sharing some ideas, and particularly a methodology we've been using over the last 5 years here at SMA to help companies with their win strategies on competitive pursuits. And so I'd like to welcome John Pryor, who's going to talk about this new approach to win strategy. It's called making winning choices. John?
Hey, AJ and Jock, thanks, and hello, everyone. Okay, so let's talk about strategy. As AJ said, we've been using the Making Winning Choices framework for quite some time. I was actually going to present, but if Jock, are you the one presenting?
We've got it up for you, John, and if you just let us know where the transition.
No, I see it. That's what I was asking. If you're the one I'd point to. If you move to the next slide, Jock, that'd be great. So just as a way to frame this, as everyone on the call knows, SMA does full lifecycle support. So our systems go all the way from far left of capture, new business identification, innovation strategy, all the way to far right of capture, keep sold activities, international activities, and then obviously our core offerings right on top of capture, the proposal services, and then EVMS and all that to the right. But when we think about our strategy issues, we like to think about it in this kind of 2x2 framework. 2x2 is required by consulting law, so it's the only way that we can write these things. Where we typically like to go, there are in these purple ones. So essentially, they tend to be unique problems, whether they're tactical, so tighter in kind of perspective, so organizational design kinds of things fall in that, or whether they're strategic in terms of reinventing your business, doing a pursuit that'll open a franchise opportunity or make you a big prime or establish yourself. Many of you on this call have worked on a number of pursuits that have established our customers, our clients as experts in this area. And so this is sort of the way that we scope strategy to begin with. Jock, if you can move to the next slide. Every company has their way, who does strategy has a way of thinking about it. So in terms of whatever framework they'll use, there are lots of different frameworks. This happens to be the one that we use. We call it the choice cascade. Yeah, thank you. I saw that on the title, Darren, earlier. So I need to make I made the change on my computer, but didn't get the updated one. So the mapping the strategy from beginning to end. So strategy is all about understanding where you want to go, where you're going to actually place, which markets, how you're going to win. So what's your unique right to win? What's your value proposition? And then aligning your management systems and assets and capabilities. All of these are integrated choices. You make any one of these outside the context of the others, they are unlikely to be as successful. Move to the next slide, Jock. So how does anybody think about this? So strategy ends up being a very tofu word. You'll hear strategy used almost interchangeably any number of times by everybody, no matter what they're doing at every level of operation. But ultimately, strategy is about those integrated choices and trying to advance really where you are in a significant way. The challenge for a lot of companies is that they do strategy really in a quite opaque way. So there's a whole bunch of data that goes into it, but it's often driven by personal experience. It's often driven by anecdote. It's often driven by their perspective and where they think it might go. That then goes into some sort of system. Theoretically, there's a planning process. Oftentimes, it's just a senior leader making a decision or a handful of other people. And then you'll come up with these courses of action. So what ends up happening is you really haven't made these courses of action. They're not distinctive. They're not robust. They're not necessarily compelling. And it's unclear what the real value is. So this transparency, lack of transparency is a real problem. So what have we done about this? Jock, if you can go to the next slide, please. So this is how we think about strategy. It is a 9-step process. We offer it in a couple of different ways. So we will do this in a 10 to 16 week full project, helping clients, but we also do these in 3 to 5 week rapid cycle activities. Which is how I'm going to frame it when we talk today. And we do it specific to win strategy. But this is really, for us, it's all about transparency. So the people who come to deal with these activities, we want to have everyone from across functional areas to truly understand what is the competitive issue, what are the options that they have. then actually go through, and I'll talk about reverse engineering shortly, but go through and understand what are the actions and steps that are necessary to be successful, and then to create the action plans and the metrics to make sure that you're managing that strategy. So it's not just a structure, or excuse me, it's not just a straw man, but it's actually something everyone's working against. So, and that's really at the heart of it. So that number 2, translating strategy to action, it's critical. If a great strategy, an 80% strategy, 20% executed, is worse than a 60% strategy, 80% executed. So it's really about converting it to action so that everyone knows where they're going. And then it's about gaining that common understanding, which is number 3. And then number 4 is critical too. So that's this idea of being able to have everything transparent. So if information changes, you can go back and relook at it. At the heart of this, we often believe that people have implicit and explicit assumptions, but if they don't actually do it in this transparent way, then it's actually quite difficult for them to know what they're looking at. So in many cases, everyone thinks or knows that everyone else has the same assumptions they do, but they don't. And that creates real significant problems. Okay, next slide, Jock. Okay, so I'm going to move past the first couple where we actually set and frame the conditions. But what we often do, particularly in in win theme development, is there's often already an option that is in place. And it's really about pressure testing that option. So we use this concept called reverse engineering. What is reverse engineering? You start with the end in mind, you work your way backwards. Why do we do that? There's a couple of reasons for it. The first reason is that for companies that start bottom up, a number of things can happen. First of all, they tend to focus on the areas that they're already good at. So we know engineering, so let's keep focusing on that. We'll dig in, we'll get really good, and then we'll pick up the other stuff as we go along. Nobody ever picks up the other stuff as they go along. They just keep looking at that. So you end up with this really rickety kind of structure as you look at it. When you go with the end in mind and work your way backward, you divorce yourself from that because you say, great, if your engineering is good, then we don't have to worry about that. But what about finance? What about your teaming? What about your partnerships? What's your customer relationship? All these other kinds of issues. The other thing that happens when you do reverse engineering is we seek to identify the handful of conditions that are most essential, and then you time structure them. So at the beginning, there may be a half dozen things that if you can't get over that line, then you're not going to be successful anyway. Maybe it's a legal issue. Maybe it's because you have a partnership with an international competitor, and if they can't get their equipment through some sort of approval process, then you won't be able to compete anyways. That's happened to companies before. So it's about really identifying those issues at the beginning that you have to attack first. Next slide, please, Jock. So that's how this works. It's a multi-step process in the workshop. These workshops tend to be full day. Sometimes we'll do multi-day workshops. They are quite intensive. As Ted Kasner used to say, for those of you who know Ted and had worked with him, it's a contact sport was what Ted would always say. And he didn't mean that in a negative sense, but it was if people aren't arguing about what's happening and why it matters, then you're not really getting the work done. So you start with the option on the right, and then you work back. So what are your competitors doing? Where do you sit relative? How are your customers working? What's the overall industry analysis? These buckets can change, but these here are the ones that we often use. And again, it's really about pressure testing where you sit. Next slide. So after you list these conditions, and depending on the activity, maybe there'll be 35 conditions, although we've done strategy ones for larger strategy, not just on a specific pursuit, where we have quite literally had hundreds of conditions, and it can get quite detailed. But you start to actually score them. So you take these conditions, you've described it in as robust of a way. It's normally, say, 1 to 2 sentences worth of detail. You try to get it as tight as possible, but make sure everybody's clear on what it is. And then you score it on 3 categories. First of all, certainty that the activity, or excuse me, that it will come to fruition, that it will actually happen. Importance, how important is it? Is it critical to the activity? Is it something that if it doesn't come through, it's not going to sink the ship, so to speak, but it's where it's at. And then control. And control is about your ability to actually do something about it. Next slide, please. So then you map these conditions. And so once you start mapping them, you start to identify areas that matter. So essentially from a quick hit standpoint, everything that is in that gray box below the halfway mark, they're obviously things you need to worry about, but they're not things you need to prioritize immediately. So you can just put those down. So we really care about stuff that's on the top half. And then we bifurcate the top half. So those things that are on the right, we think that there's a high certainty that they will come to fruition. And so those become your must-dos. That goes on your list. You're able to staff out those activities. They tend to be, not that they're easy to do, but they tend to be straightforward because everybody understands what it will take to get them there. The ones that become more problematic are the ones on the right. So you're not entirely sure that they're going to come to fruition. They're quite important. And then once you layer uncertainty onto them, then things can get really messy. And so you see the 5 categories, and this is written for proposal work that we had done for a client. The 5 categories are no control. There's just nothing you can do about it. So that's kind of stuff what your competitor decides to do. Influence only often is around your customer. So will they change the conditions? Will they move a criteria? Will they change the thresholds? You don't really have the ability to do anything about it, but you can at least talk to them depending on where you are in the competition. The green are things that are internal. Your company can do, but it's not you on the capture team, or it's not you in that specific program. So in my case, Jock and AJ have to do something. I have to convince them that it's a good idea to do something, a high threshold indeed. The blue ends up being those things that you have some control, like part of the issues are in there, and then purple are those things that you fully can control. Like there's no question, you know what you need to do, and you can just go get them. Can you move to the next slide, please? So for this particular client, they ended up with something like 18 conditions at that very highest category. And as you can see, they had a couple that were reds that were around, those were specific to competitor issues. But it ended up that the interesting problem that this particular client had were these green ones. So they needed to get approval from higher to do things. And it was really sequenced on this idea of, it was an IT job, so the competition doesn't matter. But there were some of these open questions of, well, are we going to have this type of stack? Are we going to do it ourselves? Are we going to move these facilities? The client, and this particular the end user, wanted the facilities to be in a certain location. So it was, well, are we going to talk to Microsoft and ask them to do this, or are we going to talk to the customer and see if the customer will let us change this? And so there were some really significant internal issues that they needed to do. So what do you then do once you have this? I now know I've got these 18 conditions that are really a problem for me. What do I do with that? If you can go to the next slide, please. So then you create an action plan. And these are not unique to this competition to keep it reasonable. What you do then is you start to map what are the activities that you're going to do. And I didn't include a handful of slides for time purposes, but that includes a lot of detail. What are the action plans? Who are the responsible activities? Where's the funding coming from, or where are the resources coming from? What's the timeline that it needs to be done on? And so they're quite good. They're quite detailed. Then you start to map this so that you get a sense of over time, either week by week, bi-weekly, monthly, depends on the time horizon you have. You start to actually map these things over time. Now, when we work with customers, we'll often try to develop those action plans in conjunction with them, but sometimes it becomes too big. So we'll bring in our subject matter experts. Many of you on the call have participated in these types of activities, and we'll build our own proposed action plans to test with the clients so that they can see where we think they need to go. And the last slide, Jock. So as I've said, we use this in a number of different ways, from kind of strategy at that kind of highest level. Again, no new business or portfolio strategy or those kinds of activities. But specific to win strategy development, as most of you know, we offer competitive assessment price to win products as well. And this ties in very nicely and tightly with it. And so it's really about, as that first bullet says, it's about understanding the implicit and explicit activities that are there, and making sure everyone is on the same sheet of music to move forward. And so we will actually help develop win themes. The most recent activity that I was just referring to, we worked very closely with the capture manager, who was an SMA hire, who helped to structure the outputs and what he needed and what he wanted and where he needed to get the client team all together. The whole point by bringing everyone together, by having all those functional areas at the same time, is to really just drive and increase P1 is really the activity. So let me pause there. Like Darren said, I also talk fast, and I recognize that. So let me pause there and see if there's any questions, problems, complaints, concerns.
Hey, thank you, John. That was a very nice presentation. We've found this to be a particularly effective approach when we can actually work with the client fairly early on during the capture phase, because it really also shapes their capture activities, right?
Absolutely.
Yep, absolutely. And as Dave Manero just posted, it's this idea of having people who are experts who sit outside of the organization that can often help identify insights that the internal group may not see because they're too close to the problem.
Yeah, one of the outcomes that we found when we have the opportunity to use this approach is that you get a lot more buy-in, both emotional and intellectual buy-in from all of the customers, folks who are involved in that capture, when you go through a process like this, because it actually exposes all the assumptions that each individual has going into that effort, and brings them out so that they can actually be discussed and debated to frankly just actually get to a very robust win strategy that everyone's bought into.
Yep, absolutely, and maybe perhaps another session sometime in the coming year. We've actually modified this to use under different specific circumstances, and so we have another offering called Prospective Lessons Learned, which utilizes much of the same techniques, but to really help understand and map acquisitions that are still in flux, that may not have a clear path, even though that end user says they have a clear path.
Yeah, and it's and for that approach, you got to start a little bit earlier before what John just described as an approach to win strategy. I think this is particularly robust when you compare that to the traditional approaches that our clients use, which I kind of call as Delphic or Socratic. Delphic being organizations, companies relying on one person or two people who really perhaps understand that customer well and just basically expressing their beliefs about what the win strategy should be, or Socratic being essentially a list of questions, which can actually work in some occasions, but only if you know what are the right questions to ask. So we found this to be a very effective approach. It does require a significant commitment, though, on our client's part to be involved in this process.
Right, AJ, I think this has actually replaced full boat the what we call black hat reviews.
That's right, Jock. And so we used to, as many of you know, we used to do black hat reviews as a detailed offering. But to move into this much more robust way, we believe that a competitive assessment price to win and a making winning choices workshop is far more powerful. Just for all the reasons I talked about at the beginning, the black hats tend to be very narrow. They tend to be kind of captured in the minds of whoever comes, who have great experience, but it may be anecdotal, or maybe this is really about driving that larger, more comprehensive view.
John, one thing I think that might be interesting as well is we talk a little bit about, this, how we use, I know you mentioned SMEs, but we have a little bit of time, and I think it might be interesting to talk about, a whole approach to that, because it's a critical aspect of what we deliver here, or how we develop what we deliver.
Yeah, absolutely, Jacques. That's a great point. So, as you guys know, management consulting is a small part of the business, but we think a powerful part. The way that our value proposition that we have is that we pair experienced generalist consultants, so all the consultants, whether they're our full-time guys or whether they're on our kind of like first bench of people that we call in, they're all defense experts in some way, shape, or form. Or they're healthcare experts or any number of things. But we'll pair them with established and tested methodologies and processes like making winning choices. And then where we have gaps, we will bring in subject matter experts who come in a number of flavors. Either they're bringing an insight about the end user, they're bringing an insight about the competitors, they're bringing an insight about the technology, they're bringing an insight around the operational execution and usage in the field. Often they bring expertise across multiple areas. And that really helps to take what is a useful process and being delivered in a robust and methodical way, but really help to deep dive into those things that our customers are really trying to understand, particularly when we think that there's half a dozen or a dozen, no kidding, real issues. I mean, this has happened on ship programs. We do this on aircraft programs, particularly again when there's a question that needs to be answered. Having those subject matter experts, and right now we have lots of our former government officials on right now, former admirals. So there's any number of people who are here. I just got Norm right there, one of our good-looking Marines, fancy SME, who helps us out on that stuff. So that's where we use our subject matter experts.
Right. In addition to Norm would be folks like John Rood or Ben Wackendorf, and
yeah, that's right. Greg Treverton's on the call here. Dave Manero is on the call here. I haven't gone through the list of everybody who's on the call, but that's absolutely right, Chuck. They come in a lot of shapes and flavors and sizes.
Yeah. So John, maybe we can twist your arm and you can talk to the group at the next town hall on prospective lessons learned.
Yeah, I would love to do that. So AJ and Jock have been really deeply involved with helping our team to build out that product, and we're anxious to sell it. As an example, right now we want to offer it on the large unmanned surface vessel program. The Navy is pursuing these LUSVs, but it's not clear what they need, why they need it, how they need it. So there's a lot of different flavors that can come. All of them will be right, and all of them will be good or not. Yeah, Dave. So Dave asked about black hats on this. So Dave, I can talk to you offline on why we don't offer it. The black hat can be powerful under certain circumstances. I think for our participation, it's we view that they're not necessarily as comprehensive, and they're not as methodical is really the ultimate issue.
They're rarely done right, and there's actually an element of what John just briefed that actually incorporates some of the parts which we think are missing in a traditional black hat. So yeah, excellent.